Welcome to Stop Overthinking, the podcast for overthinkers, people pleasers, and perfectionists who want to feel calm and confident enough to handle whatever life sends your way. I'm your host, Kristen, a women's life and mindset coach, lifelong educator, and recovering perfectionist. Welcome back to the Stop Overthinking podcast. We have a guest today. We are going to be talking about slowing down for high achievers. And with us today is Katy Murray. She is a business owner, entrepreneur, executive of human resources at a private organization, a mother, and a wife. So wearing lots of hats like many of us. Katy is also the co-founder of Katy & Co. VA. She helps other businesses grow and meet their success. She's also the host of her own podcast, which is called Ginger Biz. On her podcast, she shares all the tips and tricks to be successful in business while also working full-time, loving on her sweet family, and practicing self-care to maintain sanity. We are so happy to have you here today, Katy. Welcome. And tell us a little bit about how you got into this role of supporting other businesses and other people.
Yeah, thank you first and foremost for having me on the show today, Kristen. I am excited to be here. And the irony is that I'm a total overthinker, so this is totally my jam. I branched into kind of entrepreneurship and business stuff over a decade ago with my own photography business. And what I started to realize was I just loved growing businesses. Like I didn't have the ability to do a lot more with photography because I expanded to as much as I could hold in my own two hands. But I realized I was very passionate. Anytime someone's like, oh, well, how do you get more clients or how do you do this? I'd have this whole spiel. And so I realized that's kind of where the podcast grew from and my more supporting role came from, was so that I could just help others grow their businesses, because I realized I didn't need to be tied down into like photography or into stationery or whatever element that I wanted, service or product I wanted to sell, but that I could just help other people grow businesses because I just love that. So that's kind of where it stemmed from.
Fantastic. Yes. And I'm certain then your role in human resources as well just gives you some more insight on the internal workings of business and, of course, the people side of that as well. We are talking about slowing down a little bit. And so can you tell me a time when you felt the need to slow down despite external pressures to keep pushing forward? And maybe what prompted that realization as well?
Yeah, absolutely. Such a great question. So as you mentioned in my bio, I just have a lot of different elements, and you kind of reiterated the human resources one. So just to give a little context before I go into the answer is I view everything as like a triangle. So like my human resources is one of the points, my business and entrepreneurship is another one of those points, and my podcast is the third point. And the central thing in that is helping others. So with HR, I'm helping others in our industry or internally in our organization. With my podcast, it's just tips and tricks on how to grow a business and maintain work-life balance and all these things. And so it all comes back to that. And when I started to notice that I needed to pivot or change because I was doing too much was when I started to kind of dread doing anything. I mean, that probably sounds a little bit dramatic, but it was hard to go to work on a Monday when I'd come off a long weekend of back-to-back photo shoots or weddings or events or whatever the case was. And then also not having time with my family and feeling like I have to step aside from my family because I have these clients' photos to edit or these emails I have to get on top of. And so I started to realize that it's okay that I can't be a high achiever and be perfect at everything. And saying it out loud seems cliche because, like, yeah, of course I can't. But I always viewed it almost as failure when I had to walk away from something. And so today's topic is near and dear to my heart. Is I'm a total high achiever, but slowing down is so, so important to make sure that you're not spinning your wheels so that you can just take a breath and strategize and know where you want to go. Because something we talked offline about a little bit, but it's like the cult of busy. Like, I don't want to be a busy person. I want to be a high achiever. I want to be efficient. I want to get things done. And so my realization was, am I a busybody or am I being productive? And slowing down with those two and then kind of reflecting on what those looked like to me and how I could do those things while being productive and not spinning my wheels.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, such an important distinction, right? That busyness. certainly with this podcast where we're talking about not just overthinkers, but people who are high achievers, type A, perfectionists, and a lot of those tendencies, right? It is so common for that all or nothing thinking to be like, I have to do it all, be it all, and do it really well, or it's failure. And like, there's nothing in between. So that is an important realization that we know, but also, right? I mean, it's our work and our family, and we want to do the best we can. And so we're going to talk, of course, more about how to do that. Can you just distinguish a little bit more between being productive and being busy, and how you were able to make that distinction in your life?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think for many of us high achievers and overthinkers and perfectionists and all of that, we really struggle with like busyness becoming a badge of honor almost. And it's like a symbol of dedication and ambition. But then we end up like filling our schedules to the brim with meetings and projects and commitments and all these things. And at that point, it's when we think we're meeting like new elements of success, but really we're just running into kind of that relentless pursuit of achievement. And I think that slowing down and being able to see the difference. Now, for each of us, it might be a little bit different, but for me, it got to a point where photo sessions were like a number on my calendar, and I would count, wow, I did 30 this month, and I still worked full time, and I'm a mom, and when it became more of that badge of honor versus that more like, hey, I'm just proud that I did it, but I also took the weekend off and didn't do anything. That for me was the differential between being a busybody and just trying to get things done versus slowing down and doing it with intention. And a word that I use probably too often is intention. Like if you're doing it with intentionality, it's going to be vastly different. Sometimes I wouldn't say I'm money hungry, but I do have very specific monetary goals. And that's what it became for me. It was like, okay, if I get 30 sessions in this month and I have 5 VA clients and I have this and I have this, I'm going to hit these numbers. But it was all analytical. It wasn't at all about my rest, my relaxation, my time with my family. And so for me, that was the differential. Again, it might be a little bit different for other people, but I think if you're starting to feel that burnout and you're starting to dread any element that's on your plate, that would be a good time to indicate that maybe we need to slow down and revisit what we're doing.
Yeah. Can you share a time when taking a step back or slowing down actually led you to better outcomes? Because that's what we're afraid that we're going to sacrifice, is that if I slow down, then I'm not going to hit those goals. So have you found that myth, so to speak, to be inaccurate?
Yeah, absolutely. I can give you 2 tangibles. One would be, and they're both very similar, but one's in my business. I didn't hire anyone to help us until I think it was like 2020 or 21. And we'd been in business for over a decade at that point, and it was just a lot. But I was over here thinking the whole time, like, no, I have to do this. I need to do this. I need to do this. I need to do this. And really I need to slow down and strategize and say, hey, what can I take off my plate? And so where that starts is if you're unsure of if you need to slow down, is I would say first do a time audit. So that's what I did. I was like, I can't do more than what my 2 hands allow me to do. I only have the same 24 hours in every day. So for me, it was personally, I say personally in a professional sense in the entrepreneur world, where I realized like, I can't continue at this rate. I can't serve my clients the way that I want to. And so I had to slow down and have a come to Jesus with my husband and say, I just can't do all of this anymore. So what can I take off my plate? And then also in my day job, in my career, I have the same thing. I am again a control freak and overachiever. I want to do it all. And I had to go to my boss and say, I think we have to restructure a little bit, because as I'm growing in my position and growing in the organization, I can't keep growing up and keeping everything on my plate. I just can't. And so in both those scenarios, I had to press pause. To be frank, sucks sometimes because the daily work is still there. The daily clients are still there. But I had to say, no, I have to make this a priority. So I was able to slow down and say, where do I want my department to go? Where do I want my business to go? And work backwards from there, which the first tangible tip that I'd love to give your audience is a time audit. Write down what you're doing day in and day out and what do you need to be doing of that list. And that might be that you need to introduce automations and systems so that you're being more efficient, especially if it's a template email that you're constantly copying and pasting or just changing some words. Maybe it's time to look at a system that can support that so you're not manually doing it. And then also come up with automations that help. And one of the big ones for me is just like payment automations. So with our VA clients, it's just reoccurring and it automatically goes out. One of my biggest fears is that it'll go out to someone who doesn't owe me something that month, or maybe they pressed pause and I forgot. But honestly, that's never happened. So I can't live in fear of that. But that's one of those overthinking things. I try to come up with every contingency plan, but that would be where I would say you kind of start, because for me, it was just realizing like I can't do it all and I don't have to do it all.
Yeah. I've done that, from a personal perspective too, right? And it really helps when you are clear on what are my goals, what are my priorities, what are my values, what are my big rocks, whatever you want to call it. My listeners have heard that many times. And when you do that audit, take a look at what you're actually doing with your time, what you're doing with your energy and your money, and is it lining up? Because it sometimes can be pretty eye-opening. At least it was for me. Like, I say that this is really important, and it is, but it seems to be the kind of thing, it's where it can fit it in instead of scheduling it first. So yes, those audits, even if you've done it before, I think like if life isn't working or you're feeling super overwhelmed, it's a really great time to re-examine it and see where that is. So you talked about some automations a little bit there, and especially like with bills. Are there any other automations that you personally have found helpful?
Yeah. In everything I do, I try to find an automation or a system that is self-sustaining to some degree. And so with that, basically having a CRM, a client relationship management tool, can be huge. So as a photographer, I would find that if I was shooting at a similar location each time, I created an automation that the week before the session at that location, it would tell them where to park, how to do everything. And so that was kind of good. Also, like just any information that a client can utilize that you're able to send out to them. Also, personally, I try to automate a lot of things. So most all of our bills are automated. Everything for like my daughter's school, everything's automated that can be. Then in my day job, I was able to switch all of our onboarding to electronic systems. So that way it's 10 times easier, which has been really, really beautiful, which to me is similar to the CRM sort of idea of that.
I know for me too, another place that I finally figured out to automate was with grocery shopping at home. I do grocery, either online ordering and delivery. That's just completely worth it to me, but also that I just have my set thing and here are my basics. Boom. It all goes in my cart. And that for me is small, but also it's like, hey, this is the stuff that my household uses. So I think with technology, it makes it so much easier. Stuff is available. We don't always think about it. As we know, women trying to remember all the things for all the aspects of our lives. And right, so where you can offload some of those, all the better. We talked about starting with an audit, and then trying to kind of set up a system, automate it where you can. Is there anything else that you have found helpful with that? Where do you go after those automations?
Yeah, great question. And I would consider it more of a delegation, but we outsource our house cleaning. I found that kind of like you with groceries, like it wasn't giving me any purpose. It wasn't helping me do anything. And honestly, when I had my daughter, it was like really backwards because like she'd always want to be with me, which is great and wonderful. But I'm kind of a germaphobe. So then if she like touched the toilet when I was cleaning it, it was like it just threw everything off. So it was so much faster and easier for me to outsource that. So we've done that. In the grocery service, you're totally right. We've done like different meal planning services. I don't stay on top of those good enough, so we kind of cut back on that. But I still have all of our groceries delivered because, again, when you're a high achiever and you feel like you have to do it all, finding ways that you can also save your own time is so important. And for me, taking my toddler and getting my dog situated and all the stuff so that I could go to the store and walk around for 2 hours to buy, $150 worth of groceries didn't seem like it made sense. And so now I can do it in between meetings or just online order. And it is so nice. It shows up to the doorstep and it's perfect. Kind of with that, the other thing that I would say is some practical strategies for slowing down specifically so that you can allow yourself the space to think. Scheduling downtime. Like you said, like some of your items that you do want to focus on kind of fill in the cracks. Well, instead, schedule those things on your calendar and make them a priority, even if it is just downtime. You run a podcast and you probably batch edit your content and do all that. That's what I do as well. But I also will literally put in my calendar like a week hold that says like no extracurricular. That way, when I come home those evenings, I can not only be present with my family, but I also give myself the space to say, hey, I know that I'm doing too much, but I don't want to start spinning my wheels. So I'm going to slow down a little bit, give myself some space. And as much as business is very analytical and very structured and specific, I think we need time to be creative so that we can grow our businesses or spend time with our family or get creative with like just different things. Like even the other day, my husband and I had slated time to just be present, and we ended up making my daughter like a really fun lunch because the idea popped in my head that you could use a cookie cutter on a sandwich. And as silly as that is, she loves hearts, and it was like the best thing for her that day. But if I was just in the hustle and bustle of prepping lunch and keeping it moving, I wouldn't have had the ability to kind of think that way. So that would be one thing, is scheduling that downtime and almost practicing like mindfulness, being intentional with what you're doing in those moments so that you're able to be present in the rest and be present in the productivity versus blurring the lines and always counteracting yourself.
Well, and the piece too about scheduling what's really important or allowing some blocks of just unscheduled time. And I do that sometimes better than others. Like I have noticed for myself this week, I was trying to put an appointment in and, I just needed a 2-hour time block and I literally couldn't find one. And it's like, this is ridiculous. It is something that was kind of important. And I have a lot of flexibility in my schedule. I create my own schedule. It's one of the reasons why I do what I do. And yet clearly it's not working. And then I have another friend that works from home, and we try and do a walk at lunchtime once a week. And we have found even too, we have to schedule this like 3 weeks in advance because we both have this tendency to just things happen and we don't get that connection time that actually is really, important for us just to be able to unplug for a little bit too. So I'm a big proponent of scheduling because I have found when I don't, it's very clear on my calendar because life just takes over and, then I start to feel
well, and I think it's funny because I am in a moment this week and last week of the same. Like I need to slow myself down and I need to put the important things on the calendar because in my day job, we ramp up this time of year for our seasonal hires. My husband's in the same industry as I am. And so he too is facing that. And I remember last week I said something. We recently moved closer to both of our works. And one of the things was that we would do like monthly, maybe bi-weekly dates. And they can be in the morning, they can be in the afternoon. We could drop the kid off at school, utilize some of that time, cut into some of our work time and enjoy it. And last week I was like, hey, I have a free morning Friday. And he's like, me too. Let's just make sure we do it in the morning so we don't get carried away at work and get pulled in a different direction. And then Friday morning came and went, and I dropped my daughter off and I texted my husband and was like, this was our date day, huh? And he's like, shoot, it was. Even though it was like 3 days prior and we planned it out, we knew which coffee shop we were going to, it just straight out of our minds. Right. And so I'm huge for scheduling anything, even if you don't know what it is in that moment. Like for my daughter, and I actually have an episode on this because I'm very passionate about systems and scheduling, but for gymnastics, any non-negotiables we put in the calendar first. So if I was you, I would be like, okay, I want to walk with my friend. So that just goes in the calendar first. And then like my kids' gymnastics goes in the calendar first. My day dates go in the calendar first. And then you build off of that, because no matter how like intentionally want to be about squeezing these things in, it's just not realistic. And you'll find that I think you'll be more present in the off times too then, because right now, we schedule work nights. So my husband and I both will have like 2 nights a week when we know we're going to pull out our laptops once our daughter goes down. And the other 3 will just either do like home improvement or do this. We're very intentional with our time. And if I don't schedule that out in advance, like I either come home and I'm super tired and I don't do anything, or I stay up till midnight because I'm spinning my wheels trying to get it done. So I think just mentally preparing and being so intentional with your schedule in general, whether it's downtime, whether it's, batching content, whatever it is, just being really intentional is so important. And then setting realistic goals. Like, we both have a podcast, and I know that I can't do 15 episodes this week with my full-time job. So saying, hey, I can do 5 because I can do 2 and 1, 3 nights a week. And just making sure that you're giving yourself that grace to be realistic with your goals as well is huge.
Yes. So clearly, here's two of us, overthinkers and high achievers who get into kind of autopilot mode, and we're operating at a high speed and things fall by the wayside. Have there been other situations for you, like just kind of going back to our main topic here, where you were, going high speed, right? And had some failures or setbacks where, again, it made sense to pull back and slow down?
Yeah, absolutely. There's been a number of different times that this has happened. For the most part, I think I see it coming and I realize it before anything really, but especially with clients, I've felt that I can just keep on keeping on. And I don't allocate my own room for like my own boundaries and my own feats, or, the normal stuff of like getting sick and stuff. And so I have seen that there'll be times previously in October, I would like book like 30 or 40 photo sessions on top of everything else. And there'd be times when I either have to reschedule or have to call out, or the weather doesn't cooperate. So then we have to mutually agree. And that can be a lot. And I wouldn't necessarily call them failures. Everything is worked out. But the amount of stress and the white hairs that I get on my head from that are not worth it. And so that's been a setback that I've seen where I'm like, no, you got to slow down. And with that, you have to kind of be with those feelings, because if you're not, you'll just do the same thing again. And I've done that. And I would say too, recently I've been spread a little bit thin at my day job because we're down 2 team members. And every so often I'll see that I had like a typo in an email or I messed up a document, and it's really stressful because like that's not my normal quality of work. But then I also have to say like, well, you're spread thin, you're trying to get more done. Just take a deep breath. And that's what this weekend was for me. I didn't clock in. I didn't sign into my email all day Saturday just because I knew that I might just be staring at the screen and not really being productive. And so rather than sitting in that and beating myself up over that failure, I said, you know what? I'm just going to leave it alone. I'm going to focus, give my body the rest that it needs. So I try to stay away from like full on failures whenever I can.
Sure. Don't we all?
But yeah, it can be a lot. And so just being mindful of it, I think, is so important.
Overthinker and high achiever. When you notice these mistakes or errors or failures, if they're on a grander scale, how have you been able to mindset so that it's more of a learning and growing process instead of getting stuck into that, critical inner voice and, beating yourself up?
Great question. I think really the main word here is grace, like giving myself grace. I think that for the type of personality that we are, and probably a lot of your listeners are, is that we're our own worst critic and we hold ourselves to this crazy, sometimes unattainable high standard. And the people that I'm serving aren't. Nobody at my day job expects me to be here from sun up to sundown and to have my to-do list done every single day when I go home. Just like none of my clients expect me to just answer in the middle of the night or within 2 seconds of them sending a message. And so what I do is I'm a very logical thinker. I like to call myself a realist, but I'm quite honestly a pessimist. And so I try to think about like worst case scenario, I get back to so-and-so tomorrow and they had to wait 12 hours. Did someone die? Was I doing a surgery? No. And I even in my day job remind myself and others of that when they come to me in HR and they're like, Katy, I just can't. I'll be like, did anyone die today because you didn't respond? And it's like, well, no, don't be dumb. Of course not. I'm like, well, that's what we're working with. We're not these crazy surgeons. Like we do change lives. I do believe that we all have an impact, but no one is going to die from something, or nothing is irreversible in what we're doing. And so I think reminding myself of those kind of worst case scenarios and being logical about it, I can take a deep breath and say, okay, let's slow down. And then honestly, most of the time I can meet that deadline or I can do what's needed because it wasn't really that big of a failure to begin with.
Yeah, I hear you with it. I just kept thinking of, I see like t-shirts or things like quotes on it. But did you die? So
Yeah,
all of those,
exactly.
because very little in life is truly an emergency. Our nervous system likes to that some of these things are emergencies. It's a phone call that we get from somebody, or that this needs to be done. And I know as you're in a work mode, whether that's as a business owner or a manager, employee, those that things can seem very urgent. Doesn't mean that they're not, but it may not really rise to that critical level that we sometimes put on it. And as you were talking about those, what was coming to mind for me was essentially having your own boundaries, right? Whether that's at night or on the weekends. Even earlier when we were talking about that you just needed some time over the weekend to kind of recharge. And of course, there were probably work-related things that you could have been doing, but maintaining our own boundaries, because when that falls by the wayside or becomes porous or whatever we would use to describe that, we're letting ourselves down. We're letting ourselves fall into this cycle of doing too much, pushing ourselves too hard, and maybe that leads to mistakes, or maybe that just leads to burnout. I feel like we need we're looking for permission to set these boundaries up, that I don't have to be on 24/7. I don't have to respond to emails. I don't have to respond these, because one, they're probably not emergencies, and two, like, your sanity is just as important. Even though it's uncomfortable, this is a lot of what I do with clients, right? It's like, even though that feels uncomfortable in getting in touch, it's also really uncomfortable being going at that speed all of the time. So let your nervous system kind of relax, set those boundaries, and then maintain them for yourself. So I've been talking a little bit about boundaries. Just curious, is that your experience as well, or where are places that you have boundaries in your life?
Yeah, great question. I would say that I'm new to boundaries. I've been working on them for about 5 years now, which in retrospect, I guess is not that new, but I judge it based on when my daughter was born. And I remember like one instance was my daughter was maybe 2 or something, and we had to do a rain day for a photo session that I had scheduled, and I didn't have childcare that night. And so I told the client, I was very honest. I was like, I don't have childcare, so I can't make that work. Her dad won't be home in time, blah, blah. And she's like, oh, well, my mom's like a child development teacher, whatever. She would love to just come along and watch her. And I should have honored my own boundaries, but in that moment, I kind of forgot that they were my boundaries. And so I was like, okay, she's being kind. I trust these people. So it was safe. And we're in a public place, and the mom was just going to be with us. Well, being a new mom, I didn't think about the fact that my daughter may not like this woman for the mere fact that she was a stranger. And so both of my worlds collided, motherhood and my business. And it all was fine. The photos turned out amazing. My daughter survived it. But I will say that the stress that it evoked in me, the way that I felt like I wasn't able to serve my client in that moment, and the way that I couldn't love on my daughter the way that I needed to, I realized that these are my boundaries and I have to honor them. And I can't expect anyone else to honor my boundaries if I don't. Mm-hmm. So other people are not going to give me grace if I don't give myself grace. They're not going to honor my boundaries if I don't honor them myself. And so that's where I realized that, no, that was a deal breaker for me. And I had perfect right. It was the weather that made us postpone. And I've always postponed according to my schedule. I've never double booked or whatever. And not having a babysitter was still one of my own boundaries. And so that's an area where I quickly learned, okay, I have to honor these. Like you said, people will learn and adapt. In my business and in my job, I am so fast to respond to any email. I always get complimented for responding to inquiries, and I almost always book clients because I respond so quickly. But I realized that didn't sustain me. That didn't give me the time and space that I needed. Mm-hmm. And in both my business and in my job, I realized that small steps towards that. Now people don't freak out if I don't respond straight away. They're starting to basically build a relationship with me and cultivate a relationship where they know Katie's probably at home with her daughter, or Katie's probably doing this or probably doing that. And that has been so nice. Now, the transition piece was a little bit sticky because I set myself up for them to expect everything all the time.
Sure.
But practicing that and doing small things like time blocking my schedule. So one thing that I do as well for boundaries is my phone is blocked in the mornings until 9:30. So I don't get any social media, nothing. I don't get anything. So I don't have to worry about that. And that has been really nice because if you're like me and you struggle with setting those boundaries that are self-inflicted, you can utilize other resources to help with that. So for me, it's setting my phone and doing that. I even block my calendar with just the word holding, because if you're like me and you use a system like Calendly, it stops people from being able to book with me.
Yes.
I also am just intentional with my time. And one of those things is like last week, I had multiple podcasts that we were working on, also interviews for positions within my organization. And so Friday, I left completely blank. I did not want to have FaceTime with anybody because I had so much admin work to do and so many things to catch up on. And that was just a really small boundary, but it makes big impacts. So I just think it's so important to really navigate and get with yourself on your boundaries first, and talk with your spouse or your partner or, people in your life, because this will just play out in so many ways. My daughter knows when mommy's working, she's working, but she also knows she gets time with me. So she gives me a little bit more grace, even though she's only 4. And my husband's the same way. He knows that if I'm doing an hour of work on a Saturday, that the other 9 hours or 10 hours, however long we're awake or whatever, are his with me. And so you're able to kind of get people to help support your boundaries in the best of ways while really growing those relationships as well.
And that almost goes back to, like we were talking about, setting a system, right? And part of having a system is that it can't just exist only in your brain. Usually other people are impacted, and to have some of those conversations as well. Like you said, even with the working in the evenings, I like the fact that that's coordinated with your spouse, and that can be, whatever makes sense in each household, but the time blocking, even on the weekends, that maybe it works that, hey, we have our individual time for a couple of hours in the morning, whether that's work or hobbies or whatever, and then we're going to have family time. And I know that for me, sometimes it's like putting stuff on my schedule. It's really helpful and it's logical, but sometimes I have resistance. Like I want some spontaneity, and it feels like I lose that. But just having some space in there, I have found, like you said, whether it's, just putting hold in there, just allowing some space really then does give you the best of both worlds, because you can be spontaneous if you want with that time and be able to catch up on work, or, whether you're sick or you had to reschedule or you want the walk with your friend, you forgot about any of those. So I know that I'm really working this quarter as well to just be so much more intentional with my time, but that also includes the downtime. And I didn't do a formal audit, in terms of my time, but it was just enough going through in my mind that I could see, I need to line things up a little bit differently here.
Well, and you mentioned it earlier too, like if you're going at 90 miles an hour and that's your turbo, you'll never have a turbo, right? And like you mentioned a meeting that you needed to put in for 2 hours, but you had no space. Well, the cool thing about being intentional with your time and creating that margin, creating that space, putting those things on your calendar, you do have like greater resilience and also like adaptability. Is number one, if you hypothetically had that space on your calendar this week, you would say, hey, this actually takes priority. So I'm going to be a little spontaneous, get rid of my own self time and put that in. But then you also have the resilience to say, but I know I scheduled that same break for next week. So this week, I'm just going to push through a little bit. And I know I'm going to get X, Y, and Z next week. And it creates that margin. Again, for me, some of my recent mistakes are completely preventable, but like I can't prevent them because I'm in the weeds of it. I'm in the murkiness, and I can't slow down and step back and say, hey, I need to do these things. And so by creating that extra time, you can slow down. And this is all, it's kind of funny because it all just goes together in a messy way. But like, if you can slow down and make those times, then you can create those systems, you can set those delegations, you can work on those outsourcing, and then that free time will become actual free time versus just working on your systems. But yeah, it's a lot. And if you create that margin and you create that ability, you can be more flexible. And then that's the other fun thing is like, this last weekend, we were mostly free, and I was like, oh, we should have went to that safari, blah, blah, blah. And then we started thinking into the future to schedule something. I was like, well, then it's not so spontaneous anymore. So now what I do is I hold one weekend completely clear. No photo shoots, no clients, no work, no nothing. So if that weekend I'm feeling really tired, I can sleep in and my husband will tag team it with me. Or if we decide we want to go to the wildlife safari, we can just go and do it, because you're then creating space to have that spontaneity.
Yes. Fantastic idea. Thank you, Katy. This has been a great conversation and just a reminder for all of us. It's like we logically know sometimes that we need to slow down, but those reminders as well about, like you said, if you're going at top speed all the time, all of a sudden that doesn't become top speed, and it's also not sustainable. So we want to avoid that burnout. We want to take some time to slow down. So I hope whether it's managing your household or taking a look at your work life, that this podcast episode has given listeners some ideas on how to do that audit. Take a look at your systems, create some systems. And that just might be having conversations with your partner or the people in your life. Like you said, can you delegate? Can you outsource? And that might even just be trading time with somebody else, where not outsourcing doesn't always have to be that it costs money necessarily either, but it could just be trading time with some other people. And then we talked about just allowing grace for ourselves, having boundaries, and being able to be more intentional so we can create the life we want, right? But I think that's what everybody wants. So here is your system to go do it. So thank you, Katy. Any thoughts as we wrap up this episode?
No, I just want to say again, thank you so much for having me on. And I hope that there are some takeaways for those that are listening. And just, again, it's not going to be easy. It takes forever, and it's ever evolving depending on what chapter you're on in your life. Your boundaries might look different. Your systems might look different, and that's okay. So just be present with yourself and do what works for you.
Yes. So thank you so much. Can you tell us as well, if people want to listen to your podcast or more about you in general, where can they find you?
Instagram, you could find me at gingerbiz. That's GINGERBIZ. That's our handle. You can also go to the website, which is Katy Murray Photography. You can find anything that I offer and stuff. And I would love to chat with anybody who wants to send a DM.
All right. Thank you so much. So again, check the show notes, links, and thank you so much for listening today. I will be back next week with another episode of Stop Overthinking.
Thank you for listening to the Stop Overthinking podcast with Kristen Odegaard. If you enjoyed this episode, please share it with someone else who would benefit from the message. To learn more about working with me and links to social media and free resources, head over to my website, coachwithkristen.com. That's Kristen spelled Kristen. Be sure to subscribe to the podcast so you don't miss future episodes. Have a great week.